morning and welcome. I'm Melanie Vest, Chief Financial Officer at DATCU and Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas.
And I'm Terry Everett in Community Relations for DATCU in Wise County and a proud board member of the Advocacy Center.
DATCU is proud to be the presenting sponsor for this virtual event, benefiting the Children's Advocacy Center. At DATCU, we care about what happens in our Texas communities. We live here, we work here, we raise our families here. It's important to us as a credit union that we invest in restoring a child's potential.
Last year, Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas launched a full-service response in Wise County. We provided essential services to children in Denton and Wise County in the face of a global pandemic. While most businesses hunkered down, the Advocacy Center expanded to meet the increase in need. I'm so proud that DATCU played a huge role in supporting the Advocacy Center and ensuring children in our communities receive justice and healing.
On behalf of everyone at DATCU, welcome to the 5th Annual Champions for Children Breakfast, Power Restored.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Sharon Valentine, board member of the Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas and chair of the Powered Restored Breakfast. Last year, while the world sheltered in place, the Advocacy Center continued to be the place where a child comes when abuse is reported. This place and the staff kept going strong, never closing for a single day due to COVID-19. We continued to offer the gold standard of services to victims and their families, with concluding healing and justice. It still happened. In 2020, over 1,200 children bravely told their story of abuse in a neutral, child-friendly space. Well over 14,000 therapy sessions were conducted to reduce trauma symptoms. Last year, almost 7,000 children learned about body and internet safety from our educational team. Family advocate services soared. This team provided over 26,000 services ranging from emergency needs like food and clothing to Christmas presents and school supplies. Unfortunately, child abuse was up over 350% in our counties. In 2020, the total number of individuals who received services at the Advocacy Center was over 3,700, the most in our 24-year history. But no client was ever charged for any service. This morning, you will hear from key advocates from our community, as well as our speaker, Matthew Sandusky, who has a powerful story to tell. I hope this morning gives you the opportunity to learn more about the impact of abuse on a child, as well as their families and our society. I hope it inspires you to get involved and support the efforts that provide justice and healing and restores power to our victims. Please silence your phone. Settle down for an amazing story.
Children's Advocacy Center for Denton County started 24 years ago in a humble office that could barely fit 2 people. As our county has grown, so too has our little center. I bet our founders and early supporters never dreamed of the need, and how many of you would have made it possible. Our promise to ensure justice and healing now includes Wise County, expanding our footprint through the North Texas region. When the crime of child abuse is committed, a child comes to one special place, the Children's Advocacy Center. Over 20,000 children from Denton County and beyond have told their story of abuse since that early response was created in 1997. They've received safety, healing, and justice within our walls. From Pilot Point to Carrollton and from Decatur to Frisco, children have had their power restored. Our new name represents the growth that so many of you have witnessed over the past decades. Today we're proud to be Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas.
Good morning, and thank you for being here for our 5th annual breakfast. I'm Board Chair Kelly Stokes.
And I'm Board Treasurer Rob C. Thank you for joining us. You may have noticed we had a big change earlier this year, changing our name from the Children's Advocacy Center for Denton County to Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas.
In 2020, the Advocacy Center formally began offering all 6 core services to Wise County. Previously, the center had offered basic courtesy services to the children of Wise County, but the barriers to receive the full array of care were too great of a burden for the families.
As a board, we decided it made sense to offer the gold standards of care to the children of Wise County, and our new name change reflects this ongoing commitment to excellence in the fight against child abuse. And because nearly a quarter of the kids we see are outside of Denton County, the new name, Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas, is also a better representation of the large geographical space the center has been serving all along.
We see kids from all over, from Frisco to Roanoke, from Sanger to Carrollton, from Pilot Point to Decatur, and our name needed to reflect our impressive footprint. We also kept the word "for" as it is so important to remember who we are serving.
We are proud to be one agency in 2 counties with 3 locations offering full-time services.
We are so grateful to everyone who has continued to support the Advocacy Center for the past 24 years, especially this past year during the COVID-19 pandemic and then during the recent flooding of our center due to the frozen pipes.
The Advocacy Center is the place people come for help, but that day in February, it was the place people came to help. The support from the community to get the office back up and running to serve the kids was incredible. Thank you to all who donated money, your time, and your talents to come out and help.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Chief Rodney Harrison of the Little Elm Police Department, board member of the Advocacy Center and the chair of the Partner Relations Committee. You heard Sharon tell you we saw over 3,700 individuals at the center last year, and conducted over 1,200 forensic interviews. Those numbers not only represent a victim and their family, but they also represent hundreds of hours of work by the multidisciplinary team. This team is made up of dedicated law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, DFPS investigators, juvenile detention, educators, and the medical professionals. Each week, we meet to discuss cases and make sure no kid falls through the cracks. I am so proud this morning to be representing this team as they fight for healing and justice.
I'm Jason Skoog, Peterbilt General Manager and PACCAR Vice President. Peterbilt has been a proud member of the Denton community since 1980 and a proud supporter of the Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas. As part of our ongoing commitment to serve our community, Peterbilt fully supports the mission of the center. It's our hope that this partnership will continue to make a critical and meaningful difference in the well-being of the most vulnerable among us in the Denton area. Protecting our community's children should be everyone's responsibility, and Peterbilt is proud to show our support of such a noble cause. Thank you for everything you do.
Well, good morning. I'm State Representative Tan Parker, and this year's honorary chair for the Power Restored Breakfast. I'm so glad I could join you all virtually from your state capitol. Texas lawmakers are at the height of the legislative session. My colleagues and I are hard at work doing the people's business, but nothing is more important to me than the protection of our children and ensuring that every precious child has a chance to prosper and thrive in a safe environment. It's encouraging to see many legislative policies being discussed to improve the lives of our youth this session. As we work together to find ways to build brighter futures, I want to share a couple of items from my very own bill package that I believe will make a difference in the lives of our most vulnerable Texans and keep them safe. I've introduced House Bill 2285, which will prohibit sexually oriented businesses from allowing individuals under the age of 18 on their premises and will prohibit them from employing anyone under the age of 21. It seems unimaginable that any child could legally be anywhere near these establishments, and I'm proud to take a small but necessary step in the right direction by letting kids be kids and keeping would-be predators away from them always. I've also introduced a bill, House Bill 3493, dealing with childhood adverse experiences, or commonly known as ACEs. I began partnering with Children's Advocacy Center on this important legislation last session, but unfortunately time ran out before it could be passed into law. That hasn't deterred us from this fight, but instead it has made me even more determined to make a difference in the lives of innocent children whose world has been disrupted by a tragedy beyond their control. Constitutionally, the legislature has only one job: pass a budget. While lawmakers still have to approve one for the next biennium, I'm thrilled to share with you that our own Denton County Senator Jane Nelson, who leads Senate Finance, has appropriated over $85 million for the next 2 years to fund child advocacy centers across the state of Texas, which represents an increase of approximately $8 million from the previous budget. Make no mistake, there is no greater investment than our children. We must never rest in our actions, commitments, and financial support to end the horrific crime of child sexual abuse. And I'm honored to join each and every one of you to relentlessly fight to ensure that our child advocacy centers are fully supported and continue to serve the needs of our communities. And most critically, save the lives of the children who so desperately need their help. I believe the measurement of success in life is when a person is prepared to embark on a journey that fulfills their God-given calling. This leads me to introduce Kristen Howe, our wonderful Chief Executive Officer of Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas. She has worked in the field of social work and family violence for the last 20 years. Kristen graduated from Baylor University with a bachelor's in social work and the University of North Carolina with her master's in social work. Before taking the helm at the Advocacy Center, she was the Chief Programs Officer at the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center. When she began almost 4 years ago, she hit the ground running, as we all know, and the Advocacy Center continues to realize its potential as an agency offering healing and justice to more and more families and children in North Texas each and every year. Kristen's dedication and passion are reflective of a purpose-driven life to make a difference for our children, and it is a tremendous honor for me to introduce her to you this morning. I look forward to seeing you all in person very, very soon. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great state of Texas. Have a wonderful breakfast.
Hi, I'm Kristen Howell, the CEO of the Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas. I'm so glad you're joining us this morning to hear from some of the incredible people behind the work we do here at the Advocacy Center. Perhaps you were invited to join us today by one of our dedicated supporters who are so dear to the center. The truth is that they want to share with you what they've learned, that this crime is shocking, but the response to it is actually quite robust and something to take a lot of pride in. Other than headlines about child abuse, this may be unfamiliar territory for some of you. Not everyone knows what it's like to have a crime committed against them. But you know what? I bet every one of you can imagine a time when you've been wronged, when you were bullied, when you knew someone had more power than you, when you knew someone did something wrong to you. You wonder, did anybody just see that? Did that just happen? And then it happens again. And instantly you regret that you didn't tell before because you weren't sure. But now one thing is for sure, you're stuck. You look like you made it up, or like you're defensive, like you allowed it. And there you are, trapped. So you muster up the courage to tell. It's the only way. You dread it because maybe you'll lose everything. But maybe that has to be done to make the badness stop. That's how big the stakes are. But what if when you told, someone believed you? And what if they were connected and strong? And what if they had authority? What if it wasn't just one person? What if a whole team of people believed you? And what if they could make it stop? Not single-handedly, but together. Imagine the feeling that happens when suddenly the hurt and the victimized are protected. They feel power. They feel determined. Imagine the little guy and the little sis who stand up straighter against the monster, who brush off the monster and walk in their truth, not better than someone else, but also not bested by someone else. That's the power of the multidisciplinary team response to child abuse, and that response is strong in North Texas. We're putting the bullies and the perpetrators and the criminals on notice. Don't you mess with our kids. We've got their backs. There's a team of people who believe them, and together we have the power to restore anything that you seek to remove. It takes immense bravery and courage for a child to report abuse. The truth is, most of them never do. Studies show that only 1 in 10 kids tell. Many go into their adulthood or even to their grave and never tell a living soul. That's because they're afraid of the moment that they're not believed and they're left standing alone. So on behalf of those courageous children who do tell, I want to thank the hundreds of child abuse professionals for their work standing up for them. The detectives, the CPS workers, the prosecutors, the clinicians, the interviewers and the advocates, the doctors, the nurses, the fundraisers, the educators, the leaders and the support teams who stand up for kids every day. But they can't do it alone. They need you, because you too have connections and authority and the courage to stand up when someone tries to take power away from a child. Our response at the Advocacy Center is designed to create a community of safe adults who know about this issue, who are appalled when someone would dare hurt a child, and who insist that the children who face the monsters have someone in their corner. Thank you for joining our team.
Good morning. I'm Jan Rugg, Manager of Public Affairs for Atmos Energy, your natural gas provider. And it is my pleasure to be here today to introduce our speakers. This is our second year to participate in this wonderful virtual event. Our speaker, Matthew Sandusky, is the founder and executive director of Peaceful Hearts Foundation. Matthew was a victim of childhood sexual abuse from the age of 8 to 17 at the hands of his adopted father, Jerry Sandusky. Matthew is working to turn his traumatic personal experience into a mechanism to prevent childhood sexual abuse and help other survivors heal. Through his work with Peaceful Hearts, Matthew raises awareness around child sexual abuse in local communities, supports the life-saving work of children's advocacy and sexual assault treatment centers, and advocates for legislative changes. Matthew works with child abuse experts, elected officials, and the media to raise awareness and improve the quality and availability of services to survivors nationwide. In addition to his advocacy work, Matthew is committed to empowering and educating children to use their voices and help protect themselves against abuse. He is working with other advocates to implement a school curriculum to empower children. Interviewing Matthew this morning is longtime community advocate Hank Dickinson, who recently became the Director of Membership for the Denton Chamber of Commerce. Dickinson spent over 25 years with the University of North Texas Athletic Department. It is my pleasure to welcome both Matthew and Hank this morning. Thank you both for being with us.
Well, thank you, Jan. And Matthew, thank you for being with us here this morning. It is quite an honor from my end to meet you.
Well, thank you, Hank. I'm happy to be here, and it's always a privilege and an honor to be able to give, any amount of time given to this subject.
When I was asked to moderate this, it was really a no-brainer for me to say yes. Not only have I been a broadcaster of collegiate football for a number of years at the University of North Texas, but obviously just grew up a football fan. And when I first heard in November of 2011 about what was happening on the campus at Penn State with a very high-profile assistant coach in Jerry Sandusky working for one of the most notable characters in all of college football, Joe Paterno, I had to ask myself, how did this happen? How did this go unnoticed? Who knew about it? Why did it take so long for it to come to fruition? And Matthew, you were one of the victims in this. So today we're going to focus on your childhood. We're going to focus on the abuse, and we're going to focus on what you want viewers to take from today's talk. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Well, why don't we begin with you talking about your childhood before you met Jerry Sandusky? What can you fill us in on what life was like?
Yeah, well, I like to try and paint the picture for people to understand that I was born into a very poor family where there were generations of abuse. My earliest memory in life is from sitting on the edge of a bed with my feet hanging over. I was probably about 3 years old. My father is kneeling on the floor, and what he's doing is he's holding a cigarette lighter to my feet and burning my feet. And really, that's the earliest memory that I have of my childhood. And from there, it doesn't get much better. My parents were very dysfunctional. My father was an alcoholic. He would come home drunk all the time. He would beat my mother relentlessly. When he got tired of beating on her, he would turn to me. I was the oldest of 3 children. And so I guess I was just next in line. By the time I was 6 years old, my parents, as dysfunctional as they were, realized that they probably shouldn't be together. So they were divorced. And from that point forward, I've never seen my biological father again in my life. But because of that, we were forced to move into my grandparents' home, which was a home that didn't have running water. It had no indoor plumbing. It was roach infested and just filthy. And in that home, I lived with probably, I think it was 4 or 5 aunts, and there were about 10 of us children running around. And then obviously my grandfather and my grandmother. And in that home, at a very young age, I witnessed, many things. Obviously, violence was an everyday occurrence. My grandfather was a really mean old man who ruled the entire house with an iron fist. His rules were what everybody obeyed. And if you didn't, then there were consequences. And if he accused you of doing something wrong, what he would do is that he would call you into his bedroom usually, and he had an old wooden broom handle, and he would just swing that broom handle and it would hit you. It didn't matter whether it hit you in the head, it hit you in the back, hit you in the buttocks. He didn't care. And the thing that he would always say was, just tell me why you did it. And he would just try and beat us relentlessly until we just admitted to what we did, or we admitted to, what he was accusing of us of, whether we had done it or not. And so I think it's always important for, people to understand when I'm talking, this was an important lesson for me, especially as a young male. What I was learning from my grandfather at an early age was that, no matter what's done to you, no matter what you're being accused of, no matter what happens, just accept it, move on, and keep your mouth shut, basically. And so from a very early age, that's what I was getting. And that's kind of the home environment that I was born into as a child, and the types of things that I was enduring before I obviously met Jerry Sandusky. Going into school, I was a very good student. I loved school. I loved reading. I loved those types of things, and enjoyed them very much. Reading was always my escape from my reality. It was my way of getting away from, starving, or from being beaten, or just whatever it may be at the time. But very early on, I had a guidance counselor at a very young age, probably about 6 or 7 years old, who started to take notice of me. She noticed that I had a few issues, so to speak. And those 2 issues were that I had no trust in adult males, and that I had a huge self-esteem issue. I held no self-worth. I held no self-value. And so those 2 things alone kind of set me up for what would happen to me next in my life. But because of those 2 things, she knew of a program that was started to help children, that was supposed to help empower them. And so she referred me to that program.
So tell us about meeting Jerry Sandusky.
Yeah, of course. So as I was saying, with the program that she referred me to, it was called the Second Mile Program, and it was a program that was started by Jerry Sandusky. It was a program that was started to help pull children out of the environments that they were currently living in, put them with mentors, and show them that just because of where they came from didn't necessarily mean that's where they always had to exist. The premise of the program was great. The program itself helped hundreds of thousands of kids, probably. And so they always had a summer camp. Every year they had a summer camp. It was held at Penn State. It was on the campuses. We stayed in the dorms of the campus. And it was there where, honestly, I had my first interactions with Jerry Sandusky. And it was just one night when we were all going to the big meeting room, football meeting room. He kind of stopped me outside before I went in. And he was just asking me basic questions. He was asking me, how was camp? How was the food in the dorms? How was, life? And all of these very, very basic questions that as a kid, really, I felt excited because I knew who Jerry Sandusky was. Everybody knew who Jerry Sandusky was, and the status, I guess, that he held in the community. So in that moment of me first meeting him and him taking an interaction with me to know my name and then, to ask me questions, I felt special.
Did the abuse start right away?
I mean, it's all in how you define abuse. And that's kind of how these perpetrators operate. And the important term to know always when talking about child sexual victimization, especially, is grooming and what that looks like. And all that grooming is at its very basic core nature is the tactics used by a perpetrator to gain the trust of a child, to control that child, to sexually victimize that child, and then to still maintain power and control over that child. And so by him starting off with a very basic interaction, me feeling special, he knew all of my vulnerability, so to speak, because they were spoon-fed to him at the program. They knew why I was coming there. And so he knew that he could probably come in as a positive male role model in my life, and I would take to that. And so for me, I always say that's where the grooming started, which is where the abuse started, because he knew what his intentions were with me from that very first conversation.
At the time, did you think in your heart you were the only victim?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's important to also discuss that, while these things were happening to me, yes, I absolutely thought that I was the only victim. I thought I was the only person that these things were happening to. And with his grooming, it started out with the first conversation, then it would come to a car ride where he would have his hand on my leg. It made me very uncomfortable, but I always told myself that I knew where I came from was not normal. So that maybe this is how normal people show children affection. And I would always tell myself that continuously up through being fully sexually victimized by a grown man as a young boy. I always just thought that I was in the wrong. And I think that's important to understand as well, is that I never knew that anything he was doing to me was wrong, was illegal. I always just thought in my head that he was a gay man. I knew myself that I wasn't. And no matter what he was doing to me at any given point in time, I was so uncomfortable and I just wanted to run, but I never could run. I wanted to scream, but I knew that I would never scream. And, I also knew that I would never tell anybody, especially as a young male, that these things were happening to me because of the pressures that society puts on us and what that would say about me if anybody else knew he was doing these things to me. So at the time, I wasn't thinking of myself as a victim necessarily. And so therefore, I could not have thought that there were other people that he was probably doing these things to.
Tell us a little bit about Jerry Sandusky and how his interactions with other adults, what was that like? And do you feel like perhaps there was grooming going on that front as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that grooming does not only involve the child, but perpetrators also groom their environment. They groom people around the child. As I said before, the reason, that children are groomed is, I try and explain grooming to people in a very simplistic way. And if we try and understand, if you've ever heard of trying to boil a frog, if you think of it this way, if you think of throwing a frog in a pot of boiling water, the frog, most likely, as soon as it touches the water, is going to want to jump out. Okay. And so to think of grooming in this scenario, what happens is that you put cold water on the stove, you throw the frog in that water, and he's okay. But you slowly turn up the heat, and you continuously turn up the heat, and you turn up the heat, and you push further and further until before the frog knows it, he's in the boiling water and he's cooked. That's a very simplistic but easily understandable way of understanding what grooming looks like. And as I said before, Jerry Sandusky had built this persona of who he was. He was this football coach that was known all around the country, all around the world. He went and traveled everywhere. He never smoked. He never drank. He never used a curse word. He was a saint. That's how people viewed him. That's how I viewed him as a child. And this was the persona that he put out there. And then ultimately, the biggest persona that he made was that he was for children, that he cared about children. He gave up millions of dollars in jobs, college coaching jobs for children. That's what the outside world saw. But I mean, the reality of it was when you come behind the scenes is that, yes, these universities were offering him millions of dollars for children, to coach football. But it wasn't necessarily the reason why he didn't take the job. I mean, most times he was trying to get, these universities, University of Maryland, University of Michigan State, to open a chapter of the Second Mile. And that was just something that they were not willing to oblige him with. And so he never wanted to give that up. And so again, ultimately, yes, like he painted this picture to people. We all bought it. We all wanted to believe that a human being could be so saint-like, that there could be somebody in this world that just loves and cares for children so much that that is their top priority and that they would do anything to help these children. And we bought into that. And that's why myself and many others were not protected.
What circumstances then led you to move in with the Sanduskys when you were 16 years old?
Yeah, whenever I was 16 years old, I was 15 years old when it all happened. But unfortunately, I was skipping school with a friend one day. We were smoking and getting high in a truck in a barn on a stranger's property. And being dumb kids, we started a fire in that truck. Everything caught on fire, everything burnt down. We caused extreme amounts of damage to somebody's property. And I mean, honestly, it's one of the biggest mistakes of my life, but unfortunately, it also landed me in juvenile detention. And I was arrested. I was put through the court system, and Jerry Sandusky came back into the picture and said that he would be willing to take me in as a foster child. And also, you know, he gave me the option. He told me that my two options were I was going to go to a military boot camp, or I could come and live with he and his family and basically be free. And so I chose to go and live with the Sanduskys at that point in time to get out of jail.
What has been your biggest frustration with the overall investigation into this abuse?
I mean, I guess my biggest frustration in general is if we look at scenarios like this, whether it be the Catholic Church, whether it be what happened at Michigan State, whether it be what happened at Penn State or anything, because I think it's always important to understand that while yes, Matt Sandusky, have a story, there are millions of Matt Sanduskys still being perpetrated against, still being hurt. And so I think the biggest lesson for any of us to understand about this is we really need to see how institutions, their first instinct is to protect themselves. It's to shut all the doors, shut all the windows, protect ourselves, and then go from there. And that's what happened at Penn State. Everybody was blaming everybody else. Penn State took no onus. They didn't take responsibility for what had happened. It was one man on their campus that was, the bad perpetrator of these things, and everybody else was blind. But that's not true. There were people that saw things happening to me specifically that came forward after all of this had happened and went to, when interviewed, said that they had seen things and thought that it was a little off. But they had told themselves that that's Jerry Sandusky. Now I must be wrong. So there were adults who were seeing things and could have protected me, but never did. So I think the biggest lesson for us all to understand, one of the biggest lessons, is that our first instinct has to always be to protect children. If you think something is off, if you feel that something is off, you have to take it upon yourself. It has to be your responsibility to protect that child, whether you know that child or not. You have to be the adult. You may be the only thing that can save that child.
And let me backtrack just a little bit, Matt, because you waited until Sandusky was actually on trial to really reveal your personal story. Why was that? And had you tried to tell people prior to him actually being on trial?
Yeah, I waited, and it wasn't really waited. It was more that I was never going to speak my truth. I was never going to tell anybody. The abuse for me had stopped whenever I was 17 years old. I had snuck out of the house one night. I had attempted suicide. I tried to take my own life at 17. I took a whole bunch of pills. I ended up in the hospital. I failed, of course, which I am very grateful for today. But that's the point that I had gotten to. And so while sitting in that hospital bed, sick and vomiting up these poisons, this person walks in the door, my perpetrator, the person who was victimizing me for so long. And I think it's important for people to understand how brazen these perpetrators are, is that I had just attempted to take my own life at 17. But when he walked through the door of the hospital and I was still getting sick, the very first thing he said to me with a smirk on his face was, "You can't even kill yourself right." That's who these people are. He knew he wasn't going to get caught. And so from that point forward, my abuse had stopped. He was not victimizing me anymore. And to answer your earlier question, yes, up until that point, I never thought this was happening to anybody else. I didn't think that I had to protect anybody else until he went to trial, until these things really started to come out. And again, I was keeping my mouth shut still. I went to the trial the first day, and the victim that was up there speaking his truth, really, as he was speaking, I was trying to figure out how he knew what had happened to me. Because as he was going through what he had experienced, in my own mind, all that I could understand was that this had happened to me. And so in doing so, after that very first day, I was just a mess and I didn't know what to do, but I knew that victim specifically. And so I wanted to try and somehow reassure him that I knew he was telling the truth. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, I went home and I had to decide, what was I going to do? Was I going to speak my truth? Was I going to, risk losing everything in my life that I held dear for speaking my truth? Or was I just going to remain a coward and keep my mouth shut? Obviously, I used my voice. I went to the police. I told them that I was a victim as well. And as I said, I was empowered by that victim. His courage, his strength to speak his truth empowered me to find my voice. And that's why I do what I do.
You've already mentioned what our responsibility as adults should be, but why, in your opinion, did it take the university so long to do something tangible about the abuse? And why, in general, is it so hard for adults to report abuse?
I mean, for the university specifically, I can't answer those questions, obviously. But for them, it was more just damage control. It was protect the institution at all costs. And that's what it remains to this day. They've erased it. It never happened. It doesn't exist. Nobody here talks about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. And unfortunately, that's where we fall into trouble. That's where these children fail to be protected, because we don't keep this conversation moving forward. We don't continue to talk about what could have changed, what should have changed at the university or at schools or at churches. And so we leave children vulnerable to these perpetrators. And, I'm trying to remember the second part of your question. You said the university's responsibility, but why don't adults tell?
Just in general, why do adults tend to have a problem reporting abuse?
Because again, I think it's just society has made us feel as though a lot of times if it's not inside of our family, then it's not our issue. We shouldn't worry about it. If it is in our family, like my case was and millions are, it's kept secret. It's the way that these things work, unfortunately. But that's why we as adults have to educate ourselves to the signs, not only the signs of an abused child, but the signs of a perpetrator. How do these people operate? It's super important to understand that in schools, we teach children, stranger danger and those types of things. But what we don't teach children is that, unfortunately, 93 to 94% of the time, child sexual victimization happens at the hands of someone the child already knows, someone that's already in the child's life, someone that the child probably already cares for and loves. And so we do a huge disservice when we do those types of things.
Matt, unfortunately, you didn't have a children's advocacy center at your disposal as you were growing up, but you've since certainly spoken to a number of agencies and advocacy centers across the nation. What are your impressions of what's now being done and how a advocacy center can make a huge difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me to see the work that these CACs are doing all across our country is absolutely just amazing. It's important to know that their number one rule, their number one belief is that when a child walks through those front doors, that they believe that child. That's the number one thing that any of us can do for any survivor, no matter their age. But at CACs, that's the number one rule that they live by. When a child comes in there, they believe that child, and they make sure that that child knows that they are believed and protected. CACs also, it varies throughout the country, obviously, the type of programming, but they go into the school districts, they go into the schools, and they supply prevention programs to educate these children so that these children, although it's not their responsibility to protect themselves, it is helpful for them to understand when a perpetrator may be trying to groom them so that they can feel empowered to use their voices. And then another thing about the CACs that is amazing is that every single service offered to a child or the family is 100% free to that child or that family. And a lot of these families, I was in a very poor environment. I would not have been able to pay for any type of services. But CACs today, they don't have to worry about that. All they have to worry about is helping that child, empowering that child, showing that child that they will overcome this and they will heal from what happens to them.
You have been quoted in the past Matt, is saying that child abuse is a national health crisis in America. Do you still feel that way?
Absolutely. I mean, child sexual victimization is the number one health epidemic and crisis that we face as a nation. And especially in the times that we've all endured, this past year, going with COVID, where children and families and all of us have been pushed back into our own homes. A lot of us, I've heard a lot of complaining about how, it's been hard on certain people and it's been hard on this and I get that it has been hard, but we have to understand that these children are so much more vulnerable now whenever these abuses are happening in the homes. They don't have an out. They don't have anybody to speak to. They don't have a way necessarily to get to a CAC. And so we have to pay attention to that and understand that.
And you've given us an awful lot to think about. I know to reflect on, given the story that you've taken us from childhood through so many dimensions of your life. But out of everything we've heard this morning, what's the most important thing that you want this audience to walk away focusing on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And it's always hard to answer that with just a single answer. For me, I think it's important that if you're hearing this video, if you're watching this video currently, you're obviously a supporter of your local CAC. But try to do more. Try to reach out, extend your hand, see if they need help in any sort of way. Financially is always great and majorly needed, but educate yourself. Try to learn something about child abuse. And again, I only speak to one aspect of child abuse, which is the sexual victimization side of it. But there are many forms of abuse that these CACs witness, see, and help these children with. And so for me, I would say to anyone who's an adult, please educate yourself. Take the time to learn the facts of, as I said before, what an abused child looks like, what a perpetrator, how a perpetrator acts and operates. And I always think it's important as well to say to any survivor, because there are survivors watching this. And, for me, I just want to speak to you and I want to tell you that you're loved, that you are cared for, that you are beautiful, and that you will heal from this, no matter what age you are, whether you're a 5-year-old child or you're a 98-year-old woman, you will heal from this and you deserve to heal from this. Just use your voice. That's the only thing I ask survivors to do, is to speak your truth. You don't own what happened to you. It is not yours. Give it back and live your life.
Matthew, on behalf of our audience and everyone that's heard you before, thank you for the courage that I'm sure you have to sum it up every time. You have to rehash what has happened, but a massively impactful message, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the time as well.
And to our audience, thank you for your time. And we have appreciated bringing this important message to you.
We promised you a powerful story, and I think we delivered. Now I'd like to talk about how you can be powerful. To me, giving is a way you show love. I've always benefited anytime I have given. Sharing our thankfulness is one of the most powerful ways we have for spiritual growth. Developing an attitude of thankfulness is a way of learning to concentrate our attention on the positive things in our lives and to keep a positive outlook. We can acquire a mindset which emphasizes the blessings we have, what God has given us, rather than what we don't have or what we think we might deserve. In short, giving helps us shift our thinking from the negative to the positive. I have never missed any money given to our church or to any charity. I asked my husband why he gives, and he said it makes my heart feel good. Giving is a powerful medicine. And right now, your gift can go further. So please consider a generous gift today.